All right, we're going to do a little more about ESG. But first, a detour. We see a lot of rankings out there in the world, especially in the popular press. Somebody produces a ranking about the top colleges in the US, or the best cities in the US, or the best athletes ever. A while ago, Sports Illustrated did a ranking of the best athletes of all time, which somehow managed to compare Babe Ruth with Serena Williams with Secretariat. Yes, the racehorse. Just clickbait. But even comparing athletes within a particular sport is tough if they play different positions. Now you might ask, does statistics or math give me any guidance on how rankings ought to be done? The answer is, in general, no, sorry. Sometimes it feels like a lot of what we're learning is just smashing hope instead of offering solutions. You get new problems. I apologize, but rankings are really difficult. If we have a simple distance measure of a one-dimensional variable, then we can manage a ranking. In sports, we can rank how many games did a team win. That's a number. It doesn't take fancy math to determine that, say, 17 is a bigger number than 16. And so we can rank 17 wins above 16 wins. What about tie games? Sorry, no good answer. Once you add in even one more number, you're looking at a two-dimensional graph, so you need to weight the two distances. With three numbers or more, then, there are more dimensions. All the wheels come off. With a large number of inputs, all combined in one output score, that's like a utility function. There's no way to create a composite utility function that completely and successfully takes account of individual choices. That's a hard problem. Economists know this result. It's right out of microtheory, from Ken Arrow's impossibility proof. CCNY alum and Nobel Prize winner Ken Arrow demonstrated that it is generically impossible to aggregate together different people's utility functions. A ranking of bundles is a sort of utility function. Thus, it's impossible generically to come up with any ranking that satisfies basic desired criteria that will accurately aggregate together the preferences of more than one person. You might hope there's some measure to do rankings the right way, but the answer is no, nothing. It's generically impossible. Places they try to say we'll average together other people's rankings. Maybe we won't do it ourselves, we'll look at other people's. But sorry, there is no correct way to put together. So for what we're doing here, there is no correct way to put together the different parts of E, S, and G to create the best possible ranking. Now, one of the key aspects of ESG is to tell stories. Now, I don't want you to think that storytelling is not important. It is. It is really important. People tell stories about themselves in order to explain and influence the arc of their entire life. These stories are some of the most important aspects of life. Two people might get together and begin to tell a story about love. They tell it to themselves, they tell it to each other. They might have a marriage ceremony to tell the story to family and friends. If you look at old gravestones, you'll see these sorts of stories are considered important enough to be carved into stone to memorialize somebody once they've died. Stories are really important for us. Stories are important to institutions as well. That's the mission of the institution, what differentiates it and what guides it. Sure, plenty of companies have a mission that's basically to make money. But lots offer something more, and that is a profound source of excellence and differentiation. Broadly speaking, some companies might have a mission to offer affordable products. Some might offer excellent products. When somebody comes in a store looking to buy something, it's helpful if they have a sense of what that store is offering. If you're going to buy clothing, say, you understand that a dollar store is going to offer different sorts of clothes than a boutique in Soho. Especially with luxury brands, they're selling a story to their customers. They've got to be. Somehow justify that huge markup. But a company's mission also has other audiences. Many companies want to have a certain type of employee and look to attract people who have certain skills or telling themselves certain types of story. For instance, many companies in creative industries, such as entertainment, emphasize their support for LGBTQ plus causes because they understand that many of their employees want that. That's how you get the best people. Companies tell stories for their financial backers too, such as early stage investors or VCs. I mean, of course, they're all interested in cap tables and cash flow projections, but they also want a story. And of course, companies tell their story to the public, since they need support in various ways. A local politician might offer help getting permits. Regulators want to understand aspects of the business. A good story backed up by a corporate mission should be coherent to all those audiences. Companies can run into trouble if they try to tell discontinent stories to different groups. So ESG is certainly going to be important. But on the other hand, there's been a good deal of pushback recently. This graph shows net inflows or outflows to ESG funds. There was a time when it seemed like everybody was in favor of ESG and every company tried to say the right things, whether they meant them or not. But now the pendulum has swung away. Still, that might be a net positive. We know from game theory and evolutionary biology that effective signals must be costly. Otherwise, they'd be widely copied and would no longer be effective at any sort of signaling. We might be moving towards scenarios where a company that genuinely prioritizes ESG will face some cost, which would mean they're truly serious about it. That has good aspects. They might find investors who are also genuinely committed to ESG, and that might be a good match. Now, why such pushback against ESG? Some of it is based on a belief, or perhaps an assumption, that firms worrying about ESG goals must inevitably be doing so with some cost of profitability. And two things are true. One, nothing's ever free. So a firm worrying about ESG must be doing so at some cost. But two, that cost could be a worthwhile investment. Companies have substantial discretion about choosing what's best for the firm as they shape their mission. There are other alternatives out there as well. Companies could register as a B Corp, where they commit to considering their social impact on all their stakeholders, including employees and other groups. Notable B Corps include Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Patagonia, and Seventh Generation. There are other nonprofit organizations that have tremendous impact. OpenAI has been in the news recently. Much of global compute runs on Linux operating systems. But still, the climate in terms of ESG is changing. But the climate in terms of world weather patterns, that's also changing. And we can see this in various financial products. Insurance companies writing property insurance have to worry about the change in climate of the areas where the property is located. And they know that past records of whatever flooding or wildfire or other disasters are not necessarily a good predictor of future risks. Municipalities that issue bonds see that those with more exposure to climate risks have to pay a higher rate. There are well-established futures contracts for cooling degree days and heating degree days, temps being higher or lower than 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And those enable big companies to kind of buy insurance on their heating or cooling costs, as well as for utilities to buy insurance on the costs of providing power for that heating and cooling. Those financial contracts directly incorporate results from climate models. Otherwise, people would lose money if they weren't using climate information to make the best possible forecast. These all imply that big companies need to use data about the changing climate to make their own forecasts. Ignoring all that information would have real costs. Now, one reasonable question: do ESG stocks return more? Simple question, not a simple answer. Because we have to detour to understand a bit about why any company would return more. It is tough to predict. Well, why is that? If it were easy, everybody would do it. And then there'd be no extra returns. Sometimes you hear unsophisticated investors say they're going to buy, for instance, shares in Apple, because that company is really popular and well managed. And that is not an investment thesis. It might be true. I'm not saying anything against the company. But those facts are very well known. To make money, you really need an edge. You need something that somebody else hasn't got. Legendary investor Howard Marks writes often about what he calls second-level thinking. His edge, and he's a billionaire, so obviously he's done pretty well with that edge, his edge starts from considering what is common knowledge and then thinking through the second level. What is common knowledge leaving out? What is everybody else not thinking about? Clearly then, things that everybody knows, those are just first level. That's not a source of higher future returns. Now, figuring out your edge is really difficult. I sometimes give an example of a kid playing basketball. They might be the very best in their high school, which is great. It takes a lot of work. But it doesn't mean they have an NBA career. There are, tens of thousands of high schools around the world. The NBA recruits globally. But more like dozens of people each year starting in the NBA? There's a certain level of self-confidence among those kids, but do they really think they could dunk against LeBron? Unsophisticated investors don't realize when they invest in the stock market, they're basically playing against world-class people. Thinking you can make money from your own analysis of a stock is equivalent to thinking you could dunk on somebody in the NBA. Which is mentioned earlier, the best investing strategy is not to try to pick particular stocks, but buy a whole lot of stocks. Invest in a really broad-based mutual fund. That was why Jack Bogle introduced mutual funds. The S&P 500 index is approximately the top 500 biggest U.S. stocks, then buys all of them. More extreme would be something like Wilshire 5000, which buys all of the actively traded stocks in the U.S. Not actually 5,000, as the name might suggest. There are just not that many stocks. It's more like 3,500. Or, there are global versions that include non-U.S. stocks. That's investing from a place of humility. Saying, look, I'm not a pro. I don't have a team of people conducting thorough finances looking for hot stocks. I don't know which stocks will go up. So I'll buy an index. And if the value of the whole market goes up, I'll be good. It's better than thinking that I can get a hot tip from some rando on the internet. And from statistics, the average of a number of independent events will also have a lower risk. So getting back to ESG stocks, you hear two contradictory theories. In one, companies with good ESG scores are better in various ways and therefore higher returns. In the other, companies with bad ESG scores will have fewer people investing and would have to offer a higher rate of return, while those with good ESG scores would offer a lower return. Both of those things cannot be true. Nevertheless, it could well be the case that on average, companies with better ESG ratings are more profitable, better managed, but also that's well known and not a source of higher returns in the future. Just like the fact that Apple is a well-regarded company making products people really like, that's known. It's not a source of high returns anymore. Just the same way, companies with higher ESG ratings may not likely be a source of high returns or lower returns. The research is muddy. We don't have a firm conclusion.